and professor and chair of the Department of American Indian Studies here at the University of Washington. If this is the first time that you've joined us for Sacred Breath, please allow me to share a bit about the program. Sacred Breath was created in fall 2016 by myself and the Cowlitz nonfiction writer Elwha S'Klallam, who some of you may know, whose amazing writing is out there. Elwha left our program. She was an advisor in our Department of American Indian Studies and now teaches at Ohio State University. Our plan was to bring together in each event a traditional Indigenous oral storyteller and creative writer to showcase the continuity and the dialogue and interactions between Indigenous storytelling forms in a variety of genres. The series has continued quarterly with events each academic year in fall, winter, and spring quarters here at UW, and it's become one of the Department of American Indian Studies' signature events. It's always free and open to the public. This year, our Sacred Breath Advisory Committee has selected Indigenous comics and storytelling as our theme for the year. And as many of you know, there's now a rich history of Indigenous writers, storytellers, and artists collaborating in the world of comics and graphic novels. There's power, deep power, in bringing story and image together, and these creators are gaining wide acclaim and expanding the audience of Indigenous storytelling through their work. Each of our guests this year, including the storytellers you'll hear tonight, have created comics or graphic novels. We're excited to share their work with you, but we're even more excited to host community workshops in winter quarter and spring quarters this year for you to learn about how to create stories in words and images from these writers and artists themselves. Before we begin our program, I just want to call your attention to this year's Sacred Breath events, and so that you can get them on your calendar. So our winter event will feature the artist, musician, and graphic novelist Aragon Starr. Aragon will be presenting a keynote performance at Town Hall Seattle on March 7th, and will be hosting a free workshop with her on March 8th. And for our spring event, we're thrilled to bring Richard back here to Seattle on May 22nd for a performance and reading and the night of stories and readings on the night of May 22nd in Town Hall, as well as a free workshop with Richard on May 23rd. So please mark your calendars for these events. Finally, I want to share some gratitude for those who have made this event possible. Of course, to start with, thanks so much to Roger Fernandes, who's joining us, and Richard Van Camp. It's going to be an amazing evening with them. And many thanks to our Sacred Breath Advisory Committee for its guidance. Thanks as well to our AIS team who organized this event, including our program manager, Colcadam Jared Edge, Kai Wise, and Marcia Feinstein-Toby. Thanks as well to our American Indian Studies faculty for all their support and to sharing out the word of this event with their students and with our community. And finally, this program is funded through grant support from the Humanities in Place program from the Mellon Foundation, without whose support we wouldn't be able to bring this amazing event together. So let me give you a little bit of the bio before we begin. Richard Van Camp is proud member of the Tlicho Nation from Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, Canada. He's a graduate of the Anaukin International School of Writing, the University of Victoria's Creative Writing BFA program, and the Master's degree in Creative Writing at the University of British Columbia. He is an internationally renowned storyteller and best-selling author, and one of the most celebrated Indigenous writers in Canada. His novel, The Lesser Blessed, which I personally have taught many times and I know students love, is now a movie with First Generation Films and premiered in September of 2012 at the Toronto International Film Festival. He's the author of over 30 books, 5 collections of short stories, 6 baby books, one of which I know my colleague Kai has read to her children and been part of her family, 3 children's books, 5 comics, and much more. And it continues to come from Richard. It's just such a blessing to have his words in the world. Roger Fernandes is an artist, storyteller, and educator whose work focuses on the traditional arts, legends, and teachings of the Coast Salish tribes of the Puget Sound region of Western Washington. He's a member of the lower Elwha S'Klallam tribe and has a degree in Native American Studies from the Evergreen State College and a master's degree in whole systems design from Antioch University. He also studied graphic design at the University of Washington and is focused on learning, creating, and teaching Coast Salish art for well over 20 years. Roger is a writer who has shared his work in a variety of forms, including comics and in prose. He's also co-author with Fern Renville of the play Changer and the Star People, which tells a story of Changer, a Coast Salish culture figure, and a key figure in Coast Salish mythology. And you can listen to this online, which I highly recommend. It's an amazing work, and I believe he's doing another version of Changer coming up. Um, Roger is our UW American Indian Studies storyteller and residence this year, as he was last year. We're just thrilled and privileged to have him in this role for us, also supported through our Mellon Foundation grant. And I'm thrilled personally to once again co-teach a course on Indigenous storytelling with Roger, and we're planning that for winter quarter 2025. So just a few months away from starting. So if you're looking for a class, those students who are joining us tonight, think about joining Roger and myself in class. So this is how our evening will proceed. In a couple of minutes, Roger will take over, and Roger will get us started with some grounding us in Coast Salish stories. Then at around 6 p.m., Richard will share an hour or so of stories with us as well. Time permitting, we'll have time for some questions and answers. And if you have any questions that come up, please direct message Colcatum Jared Edge in the chat. He'll select a number of them to ask. Finally, we have 4 copies of Richard's work, which we'll gift tonight to 4 randomly selected folks. So we'll be reaching out via email to gift you one of his books. Now to start the evening of storytelling out in a proper way, in a way we should, I've asked our AIS program manager, Colcatum Jared Edge, who's a tribal member of the Upper Skagit Indian tribe, to offer a land acknowledgement to ground us in place. So, Colcatum, the floor is yours.
Hats'lachel, everyone. Colcatum Bustitsta, Kalalcha, Dulhilalap, Skagitubsi, Swadubschud. Good day, everyone. My name is Colcatum the Fourth, or you can call me Jared Edge. But as Chris said, I'm a member of the Upper Skagit Indian tribe, but I also have lineage to the Swinomish peoples. And today I am here as a program manager for the American Indian Studies Department, helping support all this fun programming that we have set for you tonight. With that being said, we stand here today to recognize the stewards of Coast Salish land, the original and current caretakers, the people of the Duwamish, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot. Our hands go up and the recognition spreads. So Osiam Tigwitseed and many Haishkas, thank you all for having me today, and I hope you enjoy the event.
What Colcatum. Roger, the floor is yours. We look forward to hearing your good words.
All right. I'll remove my rain hat because I'm inside now. But Chatningson Siam, Chatningson is Jaicha. Thank you for this opportunity. University of Washington, seeing the idea that, understanding the idea that storytelling is often the foundation of how cultures explain themselves to each other and to the people around them and to the world around them. And so it's a very powerful way to start any discussion of anything, especially Native culture. And so my name is Roger Fernandes, was said. I'm from the lower Elwha S'Klallam people. My great-grandmother, Annie Ned, was Jamestown S'Klallam, and she married into the Makah tribe. And through that, I have many Makah relatives as well. And I was born and raised in the city. I'm what you call an urban Indian back then. I know there were suburban Indians now, but back then it was just urban Indians. And so living in the city as a little kid, being raised by a single mother and my brothers, I found comic books to be my, so many things for me. Places of learning, places of entertainment and enjoyment, and also vision, because I read so many comic books when I was 5, 6, 7 years old. That's what I wanted to do, make comic books. And so my path led me towards art school, but as I worked in college for Native programs, I became involved in Native education. And as you know, even to this day, Native children as a group tend to struggle in school. They're intelligent, they're brilliant students and learners, but somehow they struggle in the school system. And sometimes we focus on the wrong thing. We look at the Native children and say, why are they struggling? Versus why does the educational system bring struggle to them? Why can't the educational system reach them in such a way that they feel that they're learning and they believe in themselves and their future? And so I wanted to know why. Why are children as a group struggling? And that asked me a question back then, about 30, 40 years ago. How do children learn? And how do children truly learn? And depending on the culture you're talking to, they can be very different answers. But one teacher, a non-native writer, her name was Vivian Paley, a kindergarten teacher of over 40 years experience, says that children learn through story, fantasy, and play. and that's it. Little kids under the age of 7, that's how they learn. And she has 40 years working with little kids, and she has had a big, beautiful heart and spirit. That's what she brought to her children, and her children succeeded because within the stories they can learn so many other things, not just the stories themselves, but creativity and making up their own stories and acting out those stories. And so I said, well, if that's how it is, then I need, as an educator, to learn more about storytelling, and I need to share some stories as well. So this was a long time ago. I came to storytelling, and I was so fortunate to be accepted by various elders who were teaching our old storytelling and our art and so many other things. And they would always stress with me that storytelling is teaching. It's the most fundamental teaching there is. As this kindergarten teacher also said, this is how children learn, storytelling. And the other thing they said is storytelling is healing. That you have to find out for yourself. You have to go through a journey to understand what that means. But if you carry the story of your people in your heart, then you're more secure in the world because you understand everything has a meaning. So I began to learn stories, and I was just reflecting about what I might share with you tonight. 40 years ago, I knew one story. That was it, one story. And I was very reluctant to tell it because I was sure I wasn't a storyteller. I was a comic book artist. I was a graphic designer. I was doing native designs. And so I wasn't a storyteller. I was measuring myself with my teachers who were master storytellers. And I realized at a certain point, and they stressed, you are a storyteller because you're a human being. That's why you're a storyteller, because all humans are storytellers. And so I would listen to them tell various stories and teach the lessons behind the stories. They wouldn't explain the stories. That's a very important thing to remember. The storyteller's job is not to explain the story or teach you what's within the story. Their job is just to tell you the story. But they might put you on a path of maybe asking questions about the story or finding the meaning of the story for yourself. So there was a story I learned that really helped me to understand the things that might lie within a story. And again, I see what I see in the story because I have my eyes, my life, my experience, my education, my feelings. But you're not me. You have different eyes that see different things and have experienced different things. So we all can help each other if we share what we see within a story. And that's what my class has been based on, is let me tell you a story, then let me maybe prompt a few questions, and then you tell me what you learned from this story. So I'm going to tell you the first story that truly helped me to understand it because I was fortunate. I was put together an art show up in the Tulalip, Everett area, and just about 30 miles north of Seattle. And during the show, a storyteller was brought in. His name was Raymond Moses Sr. And he was telling stories, but he would tell the same story every day to groups of children coming to this art show. So I heard this story about 10 times. And I knew that story. And I asked him if I could tell that story. And he said, yes, you can tell that story. I shared it so that people could learn it. And so I knew that story. Because I knew the story, I felt comfortable telling it. And then later in time, I began to realize things that were within the story that even hearing it 10 times didn't help me to truly recognize until I reflected upon the story and thought about the story, as our old people would have done. They would sit and listen and think about that story. Why was that story told? So I'll tell you that story that helped me kind of shift away from storytelling as a simple process for children of learning, a powerful one, to these stories have something to offer every one of us, from the littlest child to the eldest elder. So let me tell you this story. A long time ago, there was Beaver. Now, Beaver lived out in the woods, and you guys all know Beaver, right? Well, Beaver leads a complicated life, if you ask me, because Beaver chews down a tree to make a dam, and Beaver makes a dam to make a pond, and Beaver makes a pond to build his house in. So think about that. That's a lot of work. Chew down a tree to make a dam, to make a pond, to make your house, but that is Beaver. That is how he is. The other animal in this story is little field mouse, that little mouse that lives out in the grass. Well, one day Beaver was walking through the woods looking at all the trees. He was always studying them and learning about these trees that he liked to eat and what he didn't like. Well, anyway, while he was in the woods, he saw something, the cutest thing he had ever seen. He saw a little field mouse. And little field mouse just sitting there in the grass, and she was eating roots and she was eating grasses and things. So he looked at her and said, "Oh my gosh, she is so cute. She's so beautiful." And he watched her for a long time. He would watch her and she would watch her as she was cleaning her whiskers and taking care of herself and just doing all the little things that mice like to do out in the grass. And he said, "She is so cute. Oh my gosh. I wish I could talk to her. But she wouldn't talk to me because she's so cute and beautiful, and I'm just old Beaver." And so he would watch her and watch her. But one day he finally went to his cousin Squirrel and said, "Cousin Squirrel, do you think I should talk to Field Mouse? I really like her." And Cousin Squirrel said, "Well, give it a try. What do you got to lose?" And so Beaver said, "Okay, I'll do it." And he came walking out of the woods heading towards Field Mouse. And as he was walking towards her, all the animals in the forest could hear his heart beating like a drum. It was just beating like this. He was so scared. He got up to Field Mouse and he said, "Hi, Field Mouse." And she looked up and said, "Hello." He said, "What did I say? Oh, I know. Field Mouse, will you marry me?" And she squeaked, "No, I won't marry you. You're too fat. I can't marry you." And he walked away crying. "Oh no, I shouldn't have talked to her. She doesn't like me. She says I'm too fat. She won't marry me. Cousin Squirrel, you were wrong. Oh, what should I do? What can I do?" Well, Beaver wandered the woods for days and days thinking about his problem. "I know, I could go on a diet." "No, I don't want to do that. What can I do?" Well, Beaver knows all the trees in the forest. Beaver knows there is one tree that is the great gift giver to all the people. From this tree, the people get their wood, the boards to make their houses. They get the wood, the tree trunk to carve a canoe. They make their clothing from the inner bark of the tree. They make baskets and ropes and nets from the roots and bark of the tree. And that's, of course, cedar tree. Beaver knew that cedar tree would help him. So he went to cedar tree and he pulled off a big strip of bark. And then he tore that strip into smaller strips. He did this several times. Now he had a whole bunch of cedar strips. And he wove them together. He wove them together until he had a big belt. And he took that big belt and he wrapped it around his waist and he pulled it really tight, like a girdle. And he said, "There, I don't look so fat now. I can see my feet now. Cousin Squirrel, how do I look?" Cousin Squirrel said, "All right, I guess." "Well, I'm going to go talk to her again, Field Mouse. I'm going to go talk to Field Mouse again," said Beaver. And he came walking out of the woods again, heading towards Field Mouse. She saw him coming, and this time he looked a little better. Well, when he got up to her, he bent over to ask her the question. But you know what happened? The belt broke. The belt broke. It snapped, and it hit poor Field Mouse across the head. And she got knocked out of the woods, and she got up in the grass. She was all dizzy. She was walking around like this. And that is why whenever you see a field mouse, as it runs through the grass, it never runs in a straight line like this. It always runs like this. And that is all the story of Beaver and Field Mouse. Now, a child can understand that story. Little kids love that little story because there's a lot of things they kind of giggle at because some things happen to them that are funny. And then an adult might see something that maybe they've experienced and they're wondering about. And then an elder might see it as a wisdom, that something within that story is very powerful to learn and consider it, and not just think about the beaver and the field mouse, but the things they did and why they did those things and what happened because of those things. And so as I was looking at this story and reflecting upon it, as my classes would do, and I'd hear many, many people talk about different things in the story. And so I would ask you to think for just a few seconds, maybe. You certainly should have much more time than that. But what kind of lessons, teachings, they call them. In the Lushootseed language, Squadachi is the teachings. That's what they call the story. Storytellings are teachings because they're teaching us something. And so what's happening within this story? And one little kid helped me understand the story in a way I couldn't quite see it, but that little kid saw it very perfectly. It was a very simple question that child asked. why wasn't Beaver happy being Beaver? Why did he feel he needed to change? And that was a very, very important part of my understanding of that story now. A little kid gave it to me. And I said, well, you know what? I'm working with Native children in drug and alcohol prevention. Little kids need to be taught, instructed about the values around drugs and alcohol when they're little, not when they're teenagers. It's kind of late then. Reach them when they're little, preschool, and tell them these stories that fill a place in their little heart, their little spirits, and help them learn something that might help them later in their life. And so it helped us talk about the idea of, I guess you might call it peer pressure, that we do the things our friends want us to do. Sometimes we don't want to do it, but we do it because we want them to like us. And so did Beaver do something like that? And children, again, have these little philosophical questions about that. They explain why Beaver did what he did. They explain why Field Mouse did what she did. And a very simple question. Children say, well, don't judge people by the way they look on the outside. And I asked, well, what do you mean by that? They said, well, she judged him because he was kind of fat and she didn't said, I don't like you. And that's not right. And then one little kid, very insightful. So many little kids are so philosophical and insightful. They're just that way. They're closer to the spirit world, I've been told. That's why they're so brilliant. Is that, well, he judged her. Well, what do you mean? I asked, what do you mean? He said, well, he thought she was really cute, so she was really nice, but she wasn't nice. She said mean things to him. And so again, that kind of teaching is coming out of the stories, allowing the children to put in their own language and their own words to explain it. And again, that helps me because now, oh, I never thought of that before. So that was the first story where I listened to this story for 10 times. And then I heard children talk about that story, what it meant to them. So again, that's a good story, a good little simple story. There's some other versions of it that are a little less generous at the end, but it's still the same story of Beaver and Field Mouse. So that's how I look at the stories of our ancestors. And I'll tell you one more quick. I was always told to tell two stories because one story alone will kind of tip over and fall down because people can look at it and criticize it and tear it apart and tell us why it's not true. So tell two stories, and I'll tell you a very, very short little story here. Another of the first stories I ever knew. A long time ago, there was Dog and there was Wolf. And Dog and Wolf, they were really good friends. They were always together, they traveled together, they ate together, they visited. They were like really good friends, like brothers. But one winter, a really bad winter came and the world was covered in ice and snow. Ice and snow everywhere. And poor Wolf and Dog, they were sitting in the woods and they were shivering and cold and hungry. And Wolf said, if we don't get some food, we're going to starve to death. And that little dog said, and if we don't get some fire, we're going to freeze to death. Wolf said, I wish I knew where I could find fire and food. And little dog said, you know what? I know where to get fire and food. And Wolf said, you do? Where? And little dog said, you don't worry about it. You wait right here and I'll be back. And so that little dog took off and he headed towards the human village where people live. When he got to the village, he sniffed the air and he could smell smoke. And where there is smoke, there is fire. He went to one of the houses and sniffed around again and he could smell food cooking on a fire. So food and fire, he was in the right place. Well, that little dog went to the door of the house and put his head in and looked around. And sure enough, in the middle of the house, there was a fire. Hanging over the fire, there were racks of meat cooking. And sitting by the fire, taking care of the fire, tending the fire, was a little girl. Well, that little girl saw that little dog sticking his head in the door. She said, oh, little dog, come in, come in. And little dog liked her voice, and so he took a step in the door. She said, no, little dog, come over by me by the fire. And so little dog liked her voice, so he came closer. Now he was by the fire, and oh, he was warm now. The little girl looked at him and said, oh, little dog, you look so hungry. Let me give you some food. And she reached in a basket and gave him some cooked deer meat. And he ate it up, it was so good, his little tail started to wag. She said, oh, little dog, let me give you some more, you're still hungry. She took out some more deer meat and gave it to him. He ate it, now little tail was really wagging. Then she started to pet him on the back. And she was talking nicely to him. Oh, you're such a nice little dog. You're such a cute little dog. You're such a smart little dog. And now a little tail was really wagging everywhere. She said, little dog, stay with me. Please stay with me. I will always take care of you. You'll never be cold. because you'll sleep by the fire every night and you'll never be hungry because I'll feed you every day. Oh, little dog, please stay here with me. And little dog liked the sound of that. And so he lay down and he went to sleep in his new home. Now, did little dog forget anything? And the children always yell out, the wolf, he forgot the wolf. Well, Wolf waited for 1 day. I wonder where that little dog is. He waited for 2 days. He said he'd be right back. He waited for 3 days. Oh, I'm so cold and hungry. On the 4th day, Wolf said, you know what? I don't think that little dog remembers me. I don't think he's thinking about me anymore. I'm really angry at him. The next time I see him, I'm going to chase him out of the woods. And that is all the story called Dog and Wolf. And that story is told all around the United States and actually all around the world about jackals and dogs and wolves and dogs and all kinds of other animals and dogs, because dogs have separated themselves and they live with people now. And this story explains that. So that's an interesting way to look at it. And children will explain even more. Remember your friends is what many children get from that story. Remember your friends. And I think that's a wonderful observation by children, because by forgetting his friend, was Wolf happy with that little dog? And little children say, no, he was angry at him. So remember your friends is how children look at that story, which is a good lesson for all of us. So again, hopefully you understand the storytellers are called Squillaci in the Lushootseed language of Eastern Puget, Central Puget Sound, and that means the teachings. This is how we teach. This is how children learn. And so I use it in that way because we need these stories to help us understand, not up here, the world we live in now, but in here. And this is where the stories come from, like the dreams that we dream. The stories and the dreams come from the same place, if you ask me. And so again, I just shared with you some things I was taught. I'm anxious to hear Richard talk about maybe some of the teachings he received and how the storytelling works among the people, the children, because I know that different cultures have different languages and ways to explain it. And I want to learn some of those things too. So I put my hands up to you all again. Hatningsin Siam, good people. Hatningsin is Chayacha. Thank you for giving me a few minutes to share a couple of stories with you. I'm going to join the rest of you and just sit back and listen now and learn too, and learn and have some pretty big feelings about some of these stories we're going to hear. So again, thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to Richard Hutchinson.
Oka, Masicho Uncle, thank you, bless you. Welcome everybody, good evening. Hopefully you're all doing well. Si hobatsa gotsoete hani hoabentin day Richard Van Camp CA Sagyamasi. My friends, thank you so much for being here. I can't think of a finer ambassador for wicked storytelling other than Uncle Roger. And I want to thank Chris Teuton for inviting me here to join you tonight in this beautiful circle. And I just wanted to bring you some very good stories from our beautiful home here in Edmonton, Alberta, Treaty 6 territory. So I was born September 8, 1971. I am a pop culture junkie. I've got my Millennium Falcon on the wall, and I'm wearing my Stormtrooper moccasins for you this evening. I brought out my jewelry. I brought out my toolery. I'm not messing around. I'm going to give you my very, very best. It was a beautiful day here in Edmonton, Alberta, and I'm really excited to talk to you a little bit about comic books because Uncle has asked for some stories and some teachings from where I'm from, and I'll just start at the beginning. So yes, I was born September 8, 1971 in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, Treaty 8 country, and we're a very small community, a population 2,500. We're officially quadrilingual. So Chipewyan, Cree, French, and English are spoken at any given time. We're the Métis capital of the Northwest Territories. So growing up in a small town in the 70s and the 80s was the best. I was just saying to friends this afternoon, thank goodness I was raised before the internet. I don't think I would have had much of a childhood because I would have been hooked, with my addictive personality. But luckily, I discovered comic books and the Savage Sword of Conan and Mad Magazine and Cracked Magazine, and man, we had it made growing up. So I was saying to my friends this afternoon that, I think our town was illegally pirating all of the movie channels all over the world. Like I grew up, I remember being 8 years old and we had the new TNN, we had, what was it, Cinemax, the movie channel, we had HBO, we had it all. There's no reason why we should have had what we had, but we did. So everything that's now in the Criterion collection, I watched growing up. I watched, you name it, The Godfather. Then of course we had Aliens and Predator and Star Wars and all the good stuff and Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street and, Sleepaway Camp. I still think about that ending. That haunts me more than anything in the whole world. the ending of Sleepaway Camp. So growing up in Fort Smith, we had elders, culture, back to the land programs. My mom worked for the Friendship Center. We were always on the land. It's summer. We were out at Sioux Lake at a beautiful bush camp. We did winter camps. We did it all. We used to drive our skidoos to high school. Like we were bush, and we loved it. And Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, were the hickey capital of Canada. We could two-step to anything. I used to make nunchucks out of hockey sticks and stolen bicycle chains. I could make throwing stars out of pop cans. So I had the best friends, best elders. I was the handy bus driver for our community. It was the best thing I ever could have done when I graduated from high school. But I want to just talk to you tonight a little bit about how comic books saved my life. Just like what Uncle was saying, school was very difficult for me. I was a social student. I was going there to see my friends, not necessarily to get A's and B's. So my story with comic books begins in Calgary, Alberta. So my parents, Jack and Rosa, they decided to go back to the University of Calgary to work on their degrees. So we left Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, and I did my grades 2 and 3 in Calgary, Alberta in 1970 something. And as soon as we got there, as soon as we unpacked the house, we moved into Sunnyside Co-op housing. I was supposed to go to Sunnyside Elementary. We're literally the first days of summer, big, beautiful city. And I remember running, chasing my new friends, Chris and Toby, and I felt like I was shot from behind. And I collapsed. And I woke up 2 weeks later. Well, no, not 2 weeks later. I woke up a couple days later in the Calgary Children's Hospital. And what had happened was when I was running, my appendix exploded inside my tummy. And I woke up in an oxygen tent. One of my lungs had collapsed. My blood had turned septic. They told my mom I wasn't going to make it. I can't imagine as a parent now. Our little one is 10. I can't imagine hearing those words. It's not looking too good for your child. So my new friends, Chris and Toby, we had just met them. Their parents told them the new kid from the north isn't going to make it, and you should go visit him. And I remember being in this oxygen tent and seeing our neighbors, Chris and Toby. I mean, they must have been 7 and 8, and they were wearing suits. And they showed up with their entire comic book collection. They showed up with stacks of comics, and they said, Richard, you're going to be here for a while, and you might not be coming out. And I remember being in my little oxygen tent, going, "Wait, why wouldn't I be coming out?" And they said, when pharaohs pass away, they gift them with everything they're going to need on the other side. Well, Richard, you can have all our comic books, and we're just so sorry that you came to Calgary and it all ended like this. And I realized in a heartbeat that they didn't think I was going to make it. So they gave me their comic books and they were quickly ushered out. And I remember hearing my mom cry in the hallway. And that's when I made up my mind about my life that I wasn't going to die. I was going to do everything I could because I think it was 7 or 8 years old. I had so much, to look forward to. I wasn't going to kick off the planet anytime soon. So I made a deal. I'm not going to die anytime soon. I got too much love to give to this planet. I got too much work to do down here. And I'm not ready. Don't take me yet. And one of the comic books that was in that stack of Sergeant Rock and all the comic books like X-Men, Fantastic Four, the one comic that won my heart was issue 13 of Mike Grell's The Warlord. And in this comic book, in this closet over here, I think I have 7 long boxes of comics, and I have every issue of The Warlord. It was issue 13 of The Warlord by Mike Grell. It was a very human story about a gentleman who was a jet fighter pilot who crashed his jet and discovered a world within planet Earth that had sorcery, that had dinosaurs, that had lasers, that had shapeshifters, and I was hooked. And so for the 2 weeks that I was in the Calgary Children's Hospital, I kept reading this issue over and over and over. And I made a second deal. A, I wasn't going to die anytime soon. And B, I was going to find every issue. And when I got out of the Calgary Children's Hospital and when I was strong enough to walk, I remember walking down with a crutch to Sunnyside Confectionery. And I had like $20 my mom had given me. And I said to the owner, I said, "Excuse me, I would like to buy the first 12 issues of Mike Grell's The Warlord." And he said, "Kid, we're on issue, what are we, 41? Are we on 41 with The Warlord?" And that was awesome because I realized that I had a quest, and it wasn't my job to hunt down the first 12 issues of Mike Grell's The Warlord. I had 40 plus issues to hunt, and it took me years, but I have every single one. So comic books were my gateway drug. It really built my confidence to read bigger works of literature. So I was saying to friends this afternoon that, growing up, I loved Judy Blume and S.E. Hinton and Stephen King, and I really do believe that is how I became a reader first. It was through comic books and pop culture and Stephen King and Mad Magazine and Crack Magazine. So if it's okay with you, I just want to talk about a couple of the comic books I have out, but I want to just share a couple of, because I'm in my home here in the office. So I want to just show you some of the comic books that have really changed my life. This is Havoc and Wolverine, and this is the artwork of Kent Williams and John Muth. And I remember picking this up when I was about 17 or 18 at a comic shop in Calgary. And, I was never interested in superheroes with capes or people who could shoot things out of their fingertips. I was always interested in the human story. And you'll see that in my work as well, that I'm not interested in superheroes at all. I really appreciated what Garth Ennis said about comic books. He says, where I'm from, if you get shot, you stay down, you don't get up. And he said he could never stand, G.I. Joe versus Cobra, where you see these red lasers and blue lasers for half an hour and nobody gets hurt and everybody's talking the whole time. And I've always felt that the same way. So this is Havoc and Wolverine, and I love it very much. I've been a huge lifelong fan of Mr. Kent Williams, and I was really honored when he got in touch with me and he asked me to write a catalog for him. And that was just fantastic because I got to see his prints before they were on canvas. I got to ask him every question I ever wanted to ask him, and I'll show you how he draws Wolverine. So I've always said that, Kent Williams Wolverine, that's my Wolverine. I love how apish he is. I love the size of his forearms. There's a really great, I got to show this to you. And then I'm going to tell you about a really controversial comic book that you're all going to be really. So this is my Wolverine. When I think of Wolverine, I think of good old Kent Williams Wolverine. He's one of my biggest heroes. Another one of my favorite comic books is Cobra: The Last Laugh by IDW, and it's about a GI Joe operative named Chuckles, and he's about to get fired by Duke. And Antonio Fuso's artwork in here is absolutely incredible. This is called Cobra: The Last Laugh. I want you all to get out there and buy a copy or go to your library and buy a copy. So I'll tell you about the story. So there's this GI Joe operative named Chuckles. He's about to get fired by Duke because he doesn't take anything seriously. And the Duke says, look, there's a new organization called Cobra, and they're small potatoes. But if you want a foot back into GI Joe, you need to infiltrate them and figure out exactly how big they are. And so Chuckles agrees, and he starts to realize just how big Cobra is. And if you're a huge fan of GI Joe, this takes the franchise to a whole new level. And it takes no prisoners. Real GI Joes die. It's beautiful, and I'm a huge fan. I got to interview the creators of this whole series, and I've always been after IDW that when they do the 20th anniversary, you've got to include me with this world-class interview. I talked about a really bizarre graphic novel. I write horror. I've got 2 new books out, Beast and We To Go or Roth. And, our little one is 10 now. And I noticed that this is the one book that I keep putting higher and higher and higher on the shelves. And I can't bring myself to throw it away. I can't bring myself to give it to anyone. I can't even look at the interior. But it's called The Abandoned by Ross Campbell. And Ross, of course, now is Sophie Campbell, who works on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and my favorite series, Mountain Girl. I'm a huge fan of Sophie Campbell. I write to Sophie all the time. I'm her biggest fan. But this is a story about an old folks home, an elders home that is hit with zombies, and the elders turn into zombies, and it is brutal. This is the only graphic novel in the history of RX Comics in Vancouver where somebody bought it, went to the bus station, opened it, started to read it, and vomited on themselves staggered back into the store and demanded their money back. So this is called The Abandoned. I don't even have to look at it. Even talking about it, the bile rises in my throat. I love it. I hate it. I'm scared of it. It's like a Ouija board. So it's called The Abandoned. Oink Heaven's Butcher by John Mueller is so cool. It's basically Mad Max, except Max is half pig, and it's absolutely beautiful. You notice I won't open it because I don't want to wreck it. Oink Heaven's Butcher is fantastic. George Pratt, War Idol Enemy Ace. This was when again, the human story. I love how George uses paints and watercolors to talk about trench warfare in the wars. I'm a huge fan of George Pratt. I got to call him and interview him after he came out with Wolverine Natsuki. He knows I'm one of his biggest fans, and that's really the best part of social media for me is I get to write to all my heroes like Sophie Campbell and Kent Williams and George Pratt and John Mueller, and they write back. So I'm just putting that out there to all of you that if you have someone that you adore, write to them. Trust me, your words matter. And this is a really beautiful graphic novel. It's called Arctic Dreams and Nightmares by the late Alatuk Aipali, and this was published by Thetis Books. This is really illustrated literature by a wonderful Inuit artist and writer and storyteller, Alatuk Aipali. I was really sad when he passed. I felt like this is one of the artists of our time who just didn't get the recognition that he deserved. I was really proud to have spent a little bit of time with him at the Inalkin Center. He came to see us when Arctic Dreams and Nightmare came out. And I urge you all, this is about shamanism. It's about satire, very political book, Arctic Dreams and Nightmares, and I love it very, very much. Really brutal series that nobody knows about except me. It's called Zero. Go to your comic shop. I'm not going to open any of the pages because it's brutal. But if you love swamp core and moan core and cavity core, like this is your playground. It's called Zero, and I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm going to go easy on you. This is Sophie Campbell, who wrote Wet Moon, and I understand they're reissuing the whole Wet Moon series. I love it's just teenagers talking, but they're being hunted by something. I'm going to leave it at that. It's romantic. It's beautiful. It's poignant, sobering. Okay, this was the biggest graphic novel for me in grade 12. It's Arkham Asylum by Grant Morrison and Dave McKeon. And I think one of the things I want to say about comic books is that the beauty of comic books is every character has power. Comic books are a visual wow medium. There's always got to be something. And I think about this panel all the time. And so it's a spoiler alert, but I got to do it. So Arkham Asylum is about Batman gets a call one day and the Joker and the inmates have taken prisoners. I think they have the governor. I think they've got all the guards. And Joker says, well, just send the Batman. If the Batman can last an hour in the asylum, we'll let everybody go. And so Batman goes. So bad news. They have Batman. He's injured. He's bleeding out. Everyone he's ever put in the asylum is closing around him. And then Joker says, wait a minute. Let's give it to Two-Face. Two-Face, why don't you flip one of your quarters? Heads, we kill him. Tails, he lives. And so Two-Face, flicks the quarter, grabs the quarter, puts it down, and says, heads, he lives. And Joker goes, oh, there you go, Batman, you're free. Thanks for coming. Thanks for playing. And Batman hurls himself out of the stained glass and lands on the street below and barely escapes with his life. But when you close in at the end, and this is brilliant, when you close in at the end, you see Two-Face and he looks at the quarter and you realize that actually it was the coin to kill him. And I just love what Two-Face asks at the end. And it's, who cares for you, Batman? And you realize that Two-Face let him go. Just brilliant. I think about this all the time. So I love comic books. I've been collecting comic books for probably 45 years, I think. And the only comic book I collect now is Something is Killing the Children. It is kick-ass. It takes no prisoners. I love it. I'm obsessed with it. I'm so glad they sold the series to Netflix. So if you're looking for a great series, check out Something is Killing the Children. Love it, love it, love it. And last night I was on a Zoom with the class I teach at the University of Victoria, and we had Christopher Shy, who's the artist for our new graphic novel, We To Go War Roth. And I was just saying to Christopher, I'd wanted to work with Christopher for 15 years before we ever had a chance to work on Roth together. And I'll tell you that story. So I used to live in Vancouver, and a movie called Pathfinder came out, and all of my friends were in it. Everybody seemed to be an extra, everyone except me. And I went to the movie, and I remember just going, "Oh my God, there's Clarence, there's his brother, there's Chantel, there's Marilyn. Oh my God, everybody's in this movie, right?" In the whole movie theater, everyone was so happy because they were in this movie. It was shot in Vancouver, in and around Vancouver. And the movie was okay, I'll be honest with you. But a couple days later, I was at Sophie's bookstore downtown Vancouver, and I didn't realize that Pathfinder was based on a graphic novel. And it was illustrated by Christopher Shy. And I had never seen artwork like this before. I didn't understand how this artist was able to do this. And luckily, through the internet, I started following Christopher Shy. I started reaching out to him, praising him for his work. I started buying everything I could of Christopher's. I think I have all of his books. And I'd always write to him. I'd always praise him. I'd always ask questions about the artwork, about the story. And I just became the super fan. And then quietly, for everybody who's a writer and everybody who's working on stuff right now, I think you have all the power when you're working on something in secret. The lore, the creature design, the character design, the world building. There's an alchemy when you're creating something and nobody's telling you no. You're not worried about the marketing, they're not worried about anything. It's just you and yours, and the characters are the boss of you. So I was working on We To Go War Roth, and I've written 3 books in the series. And then luckily I discovered Renegade Arts Entertainment here in Alberta. And there's a great publisher named Alexander Finbow, and he is fearless. When he meets a writer or an artist and they have an idea, if it tickles his heart, if it gets his heart spinning, he will move mountains to make your project happen. And so I was lucky enough to show Alexander Finbow all 3 books in the series, and he asked me the $1 million question: well, who do you want to work with? And I said, we got to work with Christopher Shy. And he made it happen. So all praise. So I'll give you an idea. So We To Go War Roth is about a gentleman who's Indigenous. He's Dene, he's Tlicho Dene like me. And he is known in Canada as the child finder. So he's been responsible for finding over 500 missing children and returning them to his family. Unfortunately, when the story begins, big industry in northern Alberta has dug up an island. They said that they weren't going to. It was supposed to be protected. And unfortunately, these big tractors have dug up the Wetago or the Wendigo. And for those of you who don't know, the Wendigo or the Wetago, they have 27 different names. They are a spirit. It is they're also known as greedy guts, where when you're inhabited with this spirit, the more you eat, the hungrier you become. You will eat your own children. You will eat your own mother, and you won't stop there. So Ross is bit by a Wetago, but he's actually holding, and I have a beautiful stick here. When he's bit, he's holding rat root, which is one of our most powerful boss roots. It's one of our most powerful medicines. The Lakota call this bear root, but this is the root that the muskrat love. So when Ross is bit by a Wetago that's dug up by big industry, he only half turns into a Wetago. And he is still a father. He remembers his humanity. He knows he has a wife. He knows he has a daughter. And he wants to go back to Edmonton and save his wife and daughter who are trapped. But the Wetago have returned in Edmonton, Alberta, in their surrounding area. And once again, I am the luckiest man in the whole wide world to have been able to work with Christopher Shy on this. I want to show you some of the panels. We're using real people for books 1, 2, and 3. So this is David Burke from our community. He's a professional actor. He was in the Revenant. He gets killed by Leonardo DiCaprio. That's his big claim to fame. But David Burke was also in Cut Bank with Billy Bob Thornton and Bruce Dern. So he's a great actor. We're really proud of him. He was in Three Feathers, our movie based on my graphic novel with Neva Mateus. This is Mila Antoine, and she was in The Revenant. She's the chief's daughter, so she's in Fort Simpson. We were able to work with her. We were able to work with the former chief of the Salt River First Nations, my uncle, the one, the only, Mr. Henry Beaver. I've known Henry my whole life, and he is Glenn in the series. So we got to work with Larry Soul. I don't know if any of you have seen The Lesser Blessed, but Joel Evans plays Larry Soul. I mean, he was 15 years old when we discovered him, and I'll just find a little picture of Joel. So not only is Joel Evans Larry Soul in The Lesser Blessed, the movie, he also plays an actor in Three Feathers, the movie, which I'll show when I come down there, Christopher. But he's also one of our models in We To Go War Roth. And I'm really proud of that. I just got to find this if we can find it. If not, I'm not going to worry about too much about it. But wait a minute, I'm a Virgo. I can't stop. I can't stop, everybody. Anyway, I can't find it. Anyways, so Joel Evans is in here, and we're really proud of it. So as you can tell, I'm a fanatic when it comes to illustrated literature. And before I turn it back to Uncle Raj, I just want to show you a couple of the other comic books I've been working on. Really, really lucky. I have a beautiful book on sexual health. It's called Kiss Me Deadly, and you can read it online for free. I got to work with a wonderful Haida artist, Dr. Chris Octour, and his artwork was zany enough and fun enough to talk about sexual health and sensual health. So this is a story about two teenagers who broke up and they get back together, and they're on a date and things are heating up and they're getting ready to fool around. And one of them says, wait a minute, I want you to know that when we were apart, I actually fooled around with somebody and I had unprotected sex, and I want to be respectful. I think that I should probably go get tested, and I think that you should probably get tested if you fooled around with anybody, because we need to be safe. And the other partner says, well, I too fooled around with somebody. You're right. So my big question is, what do you do when you're in a small community and your mom is the community health rep, and your mom or your auntie picks up the phone, or you know that the janitor goes through medical records at night? And I got to write this, and we got to give 10,000 copies away for free all over the Northwest Territories. It's a wonderfully researched comic book, and I think comic books are the perfect vehicle to not only educate, but to use humor to educate on really maybe culturally taboo subjects like sexual health and sensual health. And I'm really proud of this. I was really proud to work with Dr. Chris Octour on this. We had over 20 CHRs, community health reps, look at this. A lot of Northern nurses looked at this, and they really guided us, because all it takes is one word to shame somebody. And we didn't want that. We wanted this to be a celebration that we are sensual, beautiful beings. And it's called Kiss Me Deadly. I got to work with the great one, Steve Sanderson, Steve Keewatin Sanderson. It's his birthday today. Happy birthday, Steve. This is called Path of the Warrior. And this is, we gave away thousands of copies. It's about a gang leader named Cullen. And one night, he and his buddy Reggie are walking, they're counting money, and there's a drive-by shooting from another gang. And the bullet misses Cullen, and it hits a baby in the heart. And the baby lives, but Cullen decides after that that he wants to get out of gang violence, and he decides to leave. But unfortunately, when you try and leave a gang, there's something called blood in and blood out. So because he leaves, he is beaten half to death by his friends. They burn his house down. They steal his car. They take all his money and his jewelry. And he wakes up in the hospital, where he's met with the police chief, and he's met by the chief of the community. And they give him a choice that either he can go to jail, where all of his enemies are waiting, or he can work at the Friendship Center and volunteer and be an escapio. That's Cree for helper. He can be a helper to the community, and that's what he decides to do. And this is a real tearjerker. This is the comic book that makes people cry, because as he starts to deal with his rage, as he starts to see the full impact of selling crack cocaine and crystal meth to his own community, he sees firsthand the devastation that his work and the work of his gang has done to his community. And the entire time that he's at the Friendship Center, he's asked by people, well, how's your daughter? Have you checked on your daughter? And he's the guy that says, it's not my kid. She cheated. That's not my baby. And everybody can't believe he would say that. But you start to understand why. And I don't want to give too much away. But you know what? Spoiler alert, I'm going to go to the last page. I bawled my eyes out writing this. Our late and great Auntie Lee Miracle said, if you're crying while you're writing, it's working. And I bawled like a baby. So the last scene, we have Cullen go to his daughter's house, and he brings his ex-girlfriend flowers, and he gets to hold his daughter for the first time. He says, hello, my girl. And you know that he's going to be just fine. And it's a beautiful comic book. You know, I'm so lucky to work with the people that I do. This is the French edition of our graphic novel, Three Feathers. This is about restorative justice. And this was based on a real story that happened in our community. We had 3 young people in our community that were coming into our houses, and they were robbing us when we were at work or we were at school. And they got our house a bunch of times. They were really good at what they did. They only took little things. So they remember Super Mario Kart for the DS. We used to have a swear jar, and they cleaned that out. We were supposed to go to Disneyland. They took my dad's retirement. He was given a beautiful bottle of wine when he retired from the college. Anyway, anyways, long story short, guns started going missing, rifles started going missing in our community. So I think as a writer, the 2 most powerful words we have as a writer is what if? What if? And I thought to myself, well, wait a minute. What if I could change the ending of how that whole thing turned out? Because what happened was these 3 young men, one was 15, one was 16, one was 18. They were breaking into a house in Fort Smith, and they surprised an elder, and the elder thought it was his grandbaby that had come home early from school. They got into a horrible fight, and the elder suffered a heart attack and a stroke when they were fighting, and he collapsed, and the youth took off because they were so afraid. And this gentleman has Bell's palsy. He'll be in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. And when the boys were caught and they were sent down south for about 2 years, some of them, I think the eldest one spent more time down south because they had thousands of dollars worth of stolen goods in their house. But when they came back from being incarcerated, there was no ceremony, there was no apology, we were all supposed to get on with our lives. And there's something called restorative justice, and I started to learn about it. And I thought, well, wait a minute. What if instead of sending these young people down south, you know, for a year and a half or 2 years, what if they were sent on the land for 9 months with the right teachers and the counselors? And what if we dealt with their rage, their abandonment issues? What if they were allowed to learn their culture and their language? And what if after 9 months, they were allowed to host a forgiveness feast at the Friendship Center where they served everyone they stole from moose and rat root and berries and bannock? And what if they gave speeches after where they said, look, we have no money, but we will shovel your walks, we will cut wood for you, we'll fill your wood boxes, and you tell us when we're good. You tell us when our debt is paid to you. If it takes 3 winters, if it takes 3 weeks, you let us know. Because we were always alone. We were bingo orphans. We were always scared, always hungry, always cold. So we decided to go into business for ourselves. And Gabe, to the elder, I just had this vision. What if they asked them, can you please adopt us as your sons? We never had a grandfather we could trust. We never had uncles we could trust. Let us be your hands. Let us work for you. Can we be family? Because we'll never forgive ourselves for what happened. You need to know we ran because we were so scared. And I saw it all. So I got to work with Neva Mateus from Hay River, and she was 15 when I met her. And I'm so grateful I had the opportunity to help her with her debut. And I'm going to wind down here pretty quick, but I want to show you this beautiful series we have. It's called The Spirit of Dene. And this is books 1 and 2. We've just sold TV and film rights to Loretta Todd, who just did a beautiful job with Eden Robinson's novel, Monkey Beach. Loretta Todd turned it into a beautiful feature film, and she wants to do this with this series. So I'll just introduce this to you, and then we'll get back to Uncle Roger. So A Blanket of Butterflies is based on a real story. We have a real suit of samurai armor that ended up in my community in Fort Smith. It was sent there. There's 3 theories. I don't give 2 hoots about the other 2. I care about my theory. My theory is that it was supposed to go to Fort Smith, Arkansas in the United States because there's a war memorial museum and there's a whole wing devoted to samurai armor. And I always think that it was a hungover Canada Post employee who couldn't see right, he couldn't think straight, and said, "Oh no, it's Fort Smith NWT. Send it up to the Northwest Territories." And that's why we have a full suit of samurai armor in our community. So I thought, well, wait a minute. What if? There's those two words again. What if? What if a young Cleacho boy named Sonny went there every day to look at the suit of samurai armor because he's afraid of it? It's like a Ouija board. He's afraid of it, but he goes there every day just to marvel at it. And one day, a man from Japan named Shinobu comes to get and repatriate the suit of samurai armor and bring it back to his family and to Japan for honor. And but sadly, he learns when he gets there that the katana, the sword that accompanied the suit of samurai armor, was lost in a card game in my community. This is set in my community of Fort Smith, and we have a real gambling problem in our community. You know, one of our leaders lost her house in a card game. She lost her whole house in a card game. So this is the real Northern Lights Museum. So the artist is Scott Henderson, and the colorist is Donovan Yachuk. And so this is the new museum director who explains that your ancestor's sword was lost in a card game to a man named Benny the Bank. You should probably just get on the plane with what you have. He's a very dangerous man. So there's our water tower. And Sonny decides to help the man from Japan, and he tells him, Benny already knows that you're here. That director has already called Benny. And the men who work for Benny are very dangerous. Now, you can get on the plane with your armor, or I can tell you exactly how they're going to attack you because they're ninjas and they're brothers and they're very dangerous and their names are Torchi and Sven. And so Sonny tells Shinobu exactly how the first attack is going to come. And it comes with arrows from the trees. And Shinobu listens very carefully to Sonny, and it's awesome. It's kick-ass rock and roll. Look at that, Chuck and Knuckles, baby. Look at that. This is like Old Boy, the hammer scene in the train station. One of my favorite martial arts sequences. So he wins. Shinobu wins against Torchi and Sven, but he has not encountered Flinch yet. And Flinch is a character I have in my short stories. He has a short story called Because of What I Did. And if you want to read about a contrary and a giant, you get to hear from Flinch how he sees the world. So he throws Shinobu's body down the landslide, and then Sonny takes Shinobu back to his grandmother's house. And we're really lucky because Tantu Cardinal wants to play at sea. And when Etsy agrees to doctor Shinobu, and she starts to take off his shirt to see how bad the damage is, she sees how fully tattooed he is, and she understands that he is Yakuza. He's a Japanese gangster. He's very dangerous, and there's a reason he won in this fight. But, Uncle, you asked for a teaching story, and you wanted to learn a little bit more about my culture and where we're from. In 1991, I was actually going to be a land claims negotiator. This is before I published any books. And I was at Native Management Studies in Yellowknife at Arctic College. And a great Sawtooth Dene elder and storyteller and writer named George Blondin came in to talk to us. And he was only supposed to stay for 30 minutes. He stayed for 3 hours. And he shared stories about the Northwest Territories. It changed my life forever. I knew when he was done, I wasn't going to give my life to politics. I wanted to do what he did. I wanted to walk into a classroom with beautiful stories, and I wanted to share them. So he shared a story with us about Elwha. And Elwha was a Dene prophet in Dene. And when Elwha was young, anything that he saw, any visions he had would always come true. And the one nightmare he had his entire life, which he told everybody, is he said, I have seen birds so powerful they never have to flap their wings. I have seen white people and Dene people taking black eggs out of the earth. And I've seen white people and Dene people taking black eggs out of the earth and putting them into the bellies of these birds. And I've seen two birds fly to where the sun goes at night, and they follow the sun. They follow the sun, and they drop two eggs on people who look just like us. And I've seen a fire so bright it leaves only their shadows on what's left of their homes. We must never help the white people when they come to our territory, our country, and look for the black eggs in our earth. And Aya passed in 1940, I believe, or 1941. George Blondin was at his funeral. And when was the detonation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki? 1945. So Aya passed 4 years before his worst nightmare come true. We didn't listen because the uranium that was used to develop the technology for Fat Man and Little Boy, it came from Port Radium and Ray Rock mines in the Northwest Territories. It came from the United States and it came from the Congo. So after Mr. Blondin passed away, I thought, well, my goodness, we need to keep that story going. So I put that in there. So there's Aya, there's Etsy, and she tells Shinobu, our people have met before in a dream because he's from Japan. So I'll leave it at that. Oh, I also, when I do comic books, I always have an agenda. I always have a cultural agenda. I want to tell a good, visually compelling story, but I want something of cultural importance. And here are our Dene laws. This is when Shinobu gets up and he sees the Dene laws on the wall. And the reason I did that is, I'm a proud uncle, I'm a proud father, and I want our children to be able to see our Dene laws in comic books. I want them to see our teachings and our traditions and our culture in our comic books. So I'm really proud to have worked with Highwater Press. And then we have book 2 in the series, As I Unfold You in Petals, and I'll make it really quick. This is about a new character named Curtis. He's fresh out of rehab. He's just finished fighting a fire outside of Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, and it's Benny's birthday. And in this comic book, on Benny's birthday, if you can amaze Benny, he'll give you $20,000 cash. And we open, Curtis is out of rehab. He's 6 weeks and 1 day sober, and he has a gift for Benny. And half the town is outside Benny's house. And Curtis waits his turn. He gets to go in. He sees Benny's girlfriend Crow, who's a shaman. There's Flinch, and there's the surprise. And I don't want to give too much away, but Curtis wins the $20,000. But Curtis hands the money back and says, I don't want the money. I want my grandfather's house. And I'll leave it at that. But this is based on something that really did happen in our community. I'm really proud of this. Hopefully, Highwater Press continues with the series. I've written books 3 and 4, but that's what I do. I'm a big, pop culture junkie, as you know, but I'm also a huge comic book collector. I've been collecting for decades, and I'm really proud now to weave my passion for reading, writing, storytelling, culture, and braid it into our illustrated literature. Masi Cho, thanks for listening.
Roger? Hey, you up for closing us out with a couple more traditional stories?
I'd love to. I just want to. I appreciate. I mean it in the nicest way. The opportunity to nerd out here with comic books. I'm. I tell my story that you mentioned Sergeant Rock. Well, that Joe Kubert was my favorite artist of all time when I was a little kid, because he could draw expressions and body movement and emotions and all kinds of things. He was incredible, still is. So hold on a sec. Because I owe my artist life to this artist, I found this at a bookstore. It's a collection of all the Sergeant Rock comic books in here. And I just found it a year or so ago. And I'll be darned if he as an artist was not incredible. As an adult artist, looking at his work, still, it's an incredible thing. So, but one thing that I think is really interesting about storytelling and reading stories, and I work with students in art as well, I ask them how many of them see, as they're hearing a story, they see a little movie or a little TV show going on in their head. And my own experience, and I'm not going to base this on any research or study, just my own experience, work with Native youth, they tend to be visual in that they want to see things. They're also, a lot of them are kinesthetic. They want to do things. That's how they learn, by doing or learn by seeing. Then you have another group that's doing fine in the schools, that they can learn by the word, by the spoken word or the written word. Many of our children, including myself, I prefer to see things. Show me what you're talking about. I want to see it. And so I don't know if that was cultivated by comics, or comics fed that thing that was already a part of me, that I wanted to see the things. And so for me, the imagination, the visual imagination people have is a gift. And I studied on how children learn, and all humans learn. And it's either visual, they need to see it; auditory, they can hear the words and learn by the words, or reading the words, which is kind of like self-reading to yourself, speaking to yourself; or they're kinesthetic, they want to do it. So it turns out that was my belief, that, well, then the educational system, the public school educational system, is missing 2/3 of our children. It's not really teaching to their strength. And the more I did storytelling, the more I realized that children create their own inner interpretations of the stories visually. And so it just is always incredible to share stories and then ask children to create art based on the story, and to focus on the emotions of the characters. What was Beaver feeling when Field Mouse laughed at him and says, "You're too fat, I won't marry you"? What did she look like? What was she feeling? And how would you draw that feeling? So for me, then, I use stories and illustration as a way of helping children to create a vocabulary of visual representations of emotions, like sadness or happiness or fear or whatever it is. So all of this weaves all together, but it always starts with a story. And so I'm always happy to share the stories that I've learned from my tribe, the tribes around us, tribes across the United States. See, storytellers, we carry the stories in here. We don't rely on a book, although books are powerful and wonderful. I love to read, I love to write. But this is how, for most of human history, people carry the stories in their heart. They heard them over and over, then they could tell them. And because they could carry them in their heart, the story could help them in a time of struggle. Wait a minute, this thing that's going on in my life that's so bad, that's kind of like that story. And what happened to the character in that story? And so the storytelling is healing part again. So there are a variety of stories that our people tell that were meant to teach people, not just up here. That's a very important part of who we are, but in here. And so I'm going to tell you a story that my teacher, and when I was looking for a teacher, I found an Upper Skagit elder woman who was very well known at the time, and she was so kind enough, I think because her son was an artist too, and she said, well, these artists are very interesting. So she let me travel with her and learn stories from her. And this is a story that's told around here. And in these political times of the modern world, that doesn't mean the problems are so big we can't solve them. That doesn't mean that we can't all play a part in that. And our stories remind that over and over. Oftentimes it's a little girl, a little mouse, a little bird, a little something helps to solve the problem. The big problem is solved not by one big hero, but by many, many little parts that come together oftentimes. And so everyone in the villages would realize, because the stories tell me in here, my brain can't quite figure this out, but my heart can. We all have a part to play in solving a problem, a big problem. And so there's a story I'll tell you then that comes from the Snoqualmie people, the Stoklebuk people, the people of the moon. Snoqualmie people, Snoqual is the moon, and they are the people of the moon. And moon is one of the big stories we tell here, the moon, the changer. But this is after him, because he made the world, got it ready for humans. But when he was done doing the work of creating salmon and berries and trees and all these things, the rivers and the lakes and everything he created so humans could live in the world in a good way, he forgot something. He forgot about the sky. And he left the sky. As he left, the sky was way down here. The sky was not way up there. It was way down here. And it was right above people's head. And because of that, the people had to walk around bent over all the time. Because if they stood up straight, they'd bump their heads in the sky. So the people walked bent over all the time. And because of this, well, it wasn't fun. You keep bumping your head anyway. Your back starts to hurt, and you can't see where you're going. You can just see your feet beneath you. So living in a world where the sky is dark and heavy upon you, it's not a good thing. It's not fun. Well, after a while, the people began to argue with each other, and you're arguing all the time. Get out of my way. You'll maybe bump my head in the sky. And then after a while, they began to fight. They were pushing each other, yelling at each other, hitting each other. Get out of my way. You're making me bump my head. And so the people were arguing and fighting all the time. And is that how people are supposed to be? And even the little kids say, no, people aren't supposed to be arguing and fighting all the time. But this is how the world was. People arguing and fighting all the time. Well, there was a young girl, one of the houses of one of the villages. And she said, this isn't right. My people are arguing and fighting all the time. Something is wrong. There must be something I can do to help. A little girl is thinking, I must help. And so she thought and she thought and she thought, and she had an idea. She walked out of the house to the middle of the village, put her hands in the sky that was right above her head, and she pushed up on it as hard as she could. And she felt it move a tiny bit. She said, if I call the other people out of their houses and we push together, maybe we can push this guy up a little bit more. And those people were grumpy. They said, oh, that's a crazy idea, little girl. That'll never work. She said, oh, please try just once. Please try to push this guy up with me. And they said, all right. And they all put their hands in the sky. And they pushed up as hard as they could. And they felt the sky move a little bit more. Now, this was a very smart little girl. She said, I know if we invite all the Indian tribes to come to the mountains, to our village, and we all push together on that heavy sky, maybe we can push the sky up, push it out of our way, push it to where it belongs. And the people said, now, little girl, that's a good idea. And so all the other tribes are called to the Snoqualmie village up in the mountains. Everyone came. All the tribes around here that live along all the rivers around here, they came, and the plan was explained how we're going to push up the sky, push that heavy sky off of us. And everyone agreed it was a really good idea. But someone way in the back said, wait a minute. There's a really big problem here, a big problem. All the tribes here, we all speak different languages. So we all have a different word for push or work together. We all have different words. So how can we work together? We can't talk with each other. Well, the people talked about this problem. They thought, they wondered, they talked some more. They threw out ideas, but nobody could answer this big problem. So, as we know, one of the ways you solve a big problem is you go to the old people. You listen to their wisdom and their knowledge. They'll help you solve that big problem. So they went to the old man who lived at the edge of the village in his own little house. And they explained the problem to him, how we can't work together because we don't speak the same language and we got to push this. So he said, well, let me think about it. Let me think about it for 4 days. Come back in 4 days and I will tell you. So the people came back in 4 days. And the old man said, you shall use the word Yahau. Yahau will mean work together. Yahau will mean push together. When I say Yahau, we all say Yahau and push up on that heavy sky. Now, if we were doing this live, I would have you all stand up and squat down, bend at your knees and put your hands right here. And I would say, now I'm the old man, I'm going to say Yahau. When I say Yahau, you all say Yahau and push up on that heavy sky. So if you want to do that, that's wonderful. That's how you remember stories. You become part of the story. You act out parts of the story, sing a song or do a dance, whatever the story asks you to do. So again, everyone put their hands like this, and the old man yelled out, Yahau! And the people all went, Yahau! And they pushed up on the sky. He did it again. Yahau! The people all went, Yahau! And they pushed up even more. The sky was moving. He said, Yahau! They all went, Yahau! And they pushed up higher. The old man said, is that high enough? And everyone said, no, So that one got big long poles from the trees, and they began to use the poles with the same word, pushing up on that sky. Yah-ho, 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 yah-ho. We did it. We pushed the sky up to where it is today. We did it. Now the sky is where it belongs. And so the story says, if the Snoqualmie people say, if we work together, we can do great things. We can even do the impossible. We can push up the sky if we work together. And that is all the people of this region call that pushing up the sky. It's a well-known story around here, and I've seen little books that have come out from other tribes using that same story, acknowledging the Snoqualmie people, the Coast Salish people. As we look at the philosophical part of the story, what is it telling you? What does it say? And again, I always reflect on what the children tell me, because they go right to the core of the story right away. In their little brilliant genius mind and spirit, say, work together. We can do great things. We must work together. But what happens if we find it hard to work together? Because people are always so different and different ages, different genders, different class of money, different all kinds of things. Education, we're different. So how do we do that? We find one thing in common. One thing that will hold us together as a group. We all agree to this one thing. And so again, sometimes it's very simple. We push up that sky, not alone, but together. We work together. And we rely on the man who taught me that story explained this to me. He changed the story a little bit from the traditional story. And I saw that, but I asked him, well, it's a nice story and everybody likes it. He says, well, I wanted to have a little girl, a little child, be the one who has the idea. To remind the children they have a part to play in solving our big problems. Then I wanted to have an elder help the people make that idea work. The idea, everybody understood that, but it wasn't working. So go to an elder, and the old one will help them understand. We work together with one word, one thought, one belief in mind as we push up the sky. So again, I'm getting too close to lecturing you and telling you that's what the story means, but you determine what the story means. You hear that story. You carry it in your heart. I was told you have to hear a story 8 times, then you know it. You can tell it yourself. And so again, the stories are so simple, but in that simplicity, woven into that story are so many philosophical, so many human reflections upon the struggles we face. And even oftentimes the animals help us as well. So that little story, pushing up the sky, what's it got to do with now? I'll let you figure that out. For me, I will share, I do occasionally share what I find in the story, just to remind you there are so many things to find within the stories, that when that part of the story that says, and so the people were arguing and fighting all the time. And I asked the children, I asked the audience, is that how people are supposed to be? No, they're not supposed to be. But in my own life, I've seen this country become more and more angry. People yelling at each other, calling each other names, fighting with each other. And it seems that somehow it got this way. But how do we turn that around? The story isn't telling us go push up the sky, but it's telling us what did we do in the story? What did our ancestors do in the story? So these stories are meant to live with us today. And again, reflecting and using metaphor and using our own creative spirit and our own interpretation, then we begin to see within the stories are things we can learn. And I really appreciate that you brought comic book storytelling into this, because those kind of stories also are powerful, because they encourage us to be imaginative, to think creatively. How can we talk about a problem through art and story versus just history and data and information and logic, but some other way to do that. So for me then, I appreciate the chance to do this. And I know that we've heard a few stories. I'm very happy to say that I connect at so many levels with what Richard was talking about. I will share a couple things I've done. This is a little thing I do. I'm kind of lower tech than some of the glossy things you showed, but I'm working my way. This is called Nettle Girl. It's about a little girl. That's kind of the mythic comic book. A little girl, an old woman who realizes the children are drifting away from their culture and the teachings. Nobody planned it, but it was happening. And so she finds a little baby in a nettle patch. And she raised that little girl to know all the plants and all the medicines and all the food plants, because I was taught that plants are our greatest teachers. And so this little girl begins to teach the children around her about the nettle plant and how healthy it is and good it is for it to eat it and to use it as a tea and a fiber and all these things. And so again, it's a way to teach something through the comic book story, the comic book characters. I was taught that not by native teachers, but by non-native teachers, that if you're trying to teach something complex, the best way to do it is through a comic book or graphic novel. Because a comic book and graphic novel have, one, a story. People love stories, not just facts and information. It also has artwork, it's visual, they can see it. And also, so it has information, it has artwork, and it also brings emotions with it, that we have feelings about the things that are happening within the story that's being portrayed in the comic book. And so it said, if you want to teach anything, start with a story and then use comic books, because that'll help us teach people in a way that they can understand. More and more people feel they can connect with things. So I felt very good when I heard that, because that's what I'm trying to do. And I can see that Richard doing the same thing. How do we teach some very complex topics without lecturing people or giving them a study or a report with numbers and words, but through art and through the story and through characters that are acting out the story, and we have feelings about what's happening in their life and where they're going, and we might even connect with them and say, wow, what would happen if that happened to me? So our old stories, to me, are the foundation of all things, and I'm so happy to see someone like Richard and other Native people saying, well, let's take it in some other directions too. Let's make sure we reach all the people we can reach in the ways that they want to learn, not the way we expect them to learn, but the way they want to learn. And so for me, wanting to learn through comics led me to who I am today. The traditional storytellers that I do, the telling that I do, I trace it back to Sergeant Rock and Spider-Man and things like that. That was my interest. Now my native culture fills that interest, because there's so much wisdom and knowledge and humanity in our native stories that's powerful. We need to always remember them. Sometimes we don't need to create a new story. Our ancestors already told that story before. So again, I don't mean to lecture you too much, although I am a grandpa. And my teacher from Upper Skagit said, when you get to be really old, Roger, like me, she said, you can talk to people like this all the time. You know what your problem is, and point your finger at them. She said, what you need to do is remember, we don't teach people like this. This is the wisdom that I'm trying to work into my graphic novels, my con. She said, you don't teach people like this. You teach them like this. You put your hand out to them to give them something. You don't threaten them. And so I said, well, I'll always remember that as well. I want to put my hand out to people and try to help them as best I can the way I was helped. So I appreciate you letting me share some more stories, some more story time here, but I learned a lot and I was smiling the whole time, because wait a minute, that's the same thing. I like right now I'm going to show you, I don't know if you've seen this one before. I've been so enthralled with this graphic novel series, only 2 books, but it's called My Favorite Thing is Monsters by Emil Ferris. And you can tell by the cover, she's an amazing illustrator. That looks like to me like a ballpoint pen, maybe pen and ink, but she does a fantastic story that allows us to experience a life through a little girl who believes she's so strange and different that she is a monster and she doesn't fit in the world. And it's a powerful, powerful story, because in the modern world, technology is moving us further and further away, in my opinion, from who we are as people. Many people are wondering, what are we going to do? How do we remember our humanity, our spirit, our ancestors, their philosophy? So again, I see a book like this and I'm just enthralled with, God, I wish I could do something like that. And I saw the books you were sharing. Oh, I wish I could do something. But again, you do the best you can. And that's what I'm trying to do. So again, thank you. Let me share these things, all right?
Wado, Roger. Wow. What an evening of storytelling and learning about Richard, the writings that you've shared tonight. I mean, I got my list it's going to keep me busy for a long time. But I've been inspired this evening, because just hearing you two riff off each other and and the different traditions you're doing, bringing in. I mean, I just can't wait for spring. We're going to have so much fun. It's going to be an amazing time. And I just love the fluidity of our cultural traditions and how they influence us, how pop culture does. Weaving these things together, as you said, Richard. It's about that's how we live. We're people of the present, and we're tied into the things that influenced us. Comics has influenced me as well, and I've taught graphic novels and comics, and they inspire me with that magic of bringing image and story together and inspiring our creativity and imagination. And I mean, personally, that's what I'm feeling tonight is just inspired to get back to work and work on my own stories and share stories. And I hope folks here tonight have felt that as well. I know we're right at our limit here at 7 p.m. Time flies when we're having fun and sharing story. But so I think we'll call it an evening tonight and save the questions for when I know all these folks are going to come back and join us in spring. And I'll work with Colcatum and with you, Richard, to put a list together of some of these works, if you don't mind, and share them out because I know folks are going to be interested and want to kind of look things up, and your work as well, Roger, too. I'd love to be able to get copies of that so that we can teach them and share them. And I know that's one of the things we're planning to do this year here at UW is get some of these works into the classroom too, so that we can teach them, we can bring people together and have some really wonderful conversations in spring. So I think we've hit the mother lode here with comics and storytelling being our theme for this year, and just so grateful to you both for joining us this evening. So I'll raise my hands to you both, and look forward to seeing everyone again in March 7th and 8th, and then of course in May 22nd and 23rd.
Okay, I'll be there.
Have a great night, everybody. Thank you so
you.
much. Bless you
Thank
all.
you.
Bless your families. This has been absolutely marvelous.
All
Seriously,
right.
thank you so much.
Sure.
Have a great night, everybody. Masi
Good
Cho.
night.
Talk to you soon.
Absolutely.
All right.
Oi.
Oi. Oi.